It's me trying to do another reading vlog, even though I'm only kind of okay at them. A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I don't know almost anything about it except that it's like a science fiction where they use renewable energy and it's supposed to sort of be like hopeful and living with the land. I'm all about this dedication here for anyone who could use a break. Isn't that just like everybody in today's society? I'm just on page 1, and this story is awesome. We're talking about robots and robot consciousness and how we created them originally to make other things for us, and they left the factories and went to the woods. Their chosen speaker, Floor AB number 921, says when they're declining, rejoining human society. It's really beautiful.
All we have ever known is a life of human design, from our bodies to our work to the buildings we are housed in. We thank you for not keeping us here against our will, and we mean no disrespect to your offer. But it is our wish to leave your cities entirely so that we may observe that which has no design, the untouched wilderness.
Thoreau kind of vibe from this story really speaks to me, and it's all something that this story is giving me on the first page. I'm loving this so much. So it looks like the whole what gods do the robots belong to and what philosophy is theirs is sort of like an irrelevant forward just to explain that there once were robots, they left the cities, and now humans and robots don't have contact anymore. Before we jump into the first chapter where we meet sibling Dex, who is tired of living in the city, giving me Stardew Valley vibes, but in the best way possible, because I do think that sometimes in our haste to like leave cities, return to nature, and sort of like idealize this more in touch with the land kind of philosophy, we demonize cities unfairly. And perhaps what we need to do is to figure out how to make cities more livable, more easy to get around, more ecologically friendly. The writing here is beautiful and poetic and engaging. So I've learned a couple things about sibling Dex. First of all, they are a monk dedicated to the god of small comforts, who is portrayed as a bear, just full and relaxed and enjoying life, which I think is great. They've made a decision to make a major life swap and to do it on their own without an apprenticeship, even though all that stuff was offered to them. It's interesting that their wishes were respected in that this job change was so easy. I already was like,
oh, I really want to be in a world like that where I could just do whatever I wanted and have it all work out.
After their first failed attempt at tea service, they don't go back to the monastery and ask for an apprenticeship out of pride. Not because they have ideas of how they could do better or they know what went wrong and how to improve in the future, but simply because they said they would be self-taught and now they feel obligated to stick to it or look silly. And again, when they have an opportunity to go to their home village and hang out with their family or to break out on their own, it's not that they want an adventure or they're trying to be independent because they enjoy that. They're doing it because they would feel small and silly and shameful to go back to their hometown and to admit they don't know what they're doing and that they kind of made a mistake and they want to hide with their family for a while. And it's very interesting that they feel a move to visit their family would be perceived that way. Sibling Dex's decision to spend so much time and effort in growing herbs and spices and drying them themselves, mixing and matching them to get the perfect cup of tea, I think all goes back to them relying on what they know. And they're not quite as comfortable with their words yet. So while the montage of them leveling up their tea game was interesting and did show that they had some kind of determination to learn something and improve in some way, I am really curious to see what their next tea offer looks like. I'm on page 43 of this book, and it looks like sibling Dex isn't necessarily like overly proud person, but they might be a person who is always looking for like the next challenge or the next thing to learn. And it seems clear to me at least that the crickets that sibling Dex is chasing isn't necessarily that sound, but it is something missing in their life, an element of the unknown. It's an interesting like step-by-step evolution of how sibling Dex is gonna get out of the city and into a wilderness that maybe no one in humanity has seen for quite some time. So sibling Dex is off the road for like a minute and immediately runs into Moscap, who is a robot. And this is the first human-robot interaction in over 100 years. I want to hug Moscap and have them be my best friend ever. They're so inquisitive and upbeat and optimistic, and they talk so quickly, even though Dex has a lot of preconceived notions about robots, which is very interesting for humans to have, given they haven't seen them in 100 years. Moscap just kind of like flicks them aside, like they're sort of like silly ideas and doesn't take offense to them. And I love that Moscap is into religion and believes in the gods and sees the gods in nature and the world around them, thinks that it's wild that humans wouldn't think that robots could believe that. I love that Moscap is a robot who's not good at math and that consciousness takes a lot of processing power, so Moscap can only do one thing at a time, just like people. It all makes sense and it's great, and it's sort of like slamming through all those assumptions we have about robots and sentience right away. I just love Moscap's chaotic energy, and I think they're going to be a great yin and yang combination. So update on my reading for Song by the Wild Bill. As I read, I got engrossed and also I was kind of losing the light. I still wanted to read outside, but it wasn't really productive to film anymore. So you guys kind of missed out on the opportunity for a vlog there. I loved A Song for the Wild Bill. It's definitely 5 stars. It is a contender for best book of the year. Uplifting and joyful and a huge in-depth character study out a lot of the larger society pressing in on it. It would definitely qualify as like either a solar punk read or a cozy fantasy / cozy sci-fi read. It's really about sibling Dex going on a hunt to kind of find themselves and running into Moscap, and the two of them sort of coming together. They have a mission or a goal in mind, but it's not earth-shattering save the world. It's more about us immersing ourselves in this new world. And Moscap is my favorite. They have made me think the robot revolution is what we need, and if we end up in like a Matrix world or Terminator style world, it's gonna be a-okay by me, because robot sentience seems to rule. And I love this book because even though there is a sequel, there's a solid conclusion here at the end of the first book. So while I want to read more, I don't have to read more to feel satisfied or to feel like my time and effort was paid off with a great ending. Because this vlog has been incredibly short and only happened over one day so far, I thought I would pick up the other Becky Chambers story that's on Kindle Unlimited, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. This specific series has also been recommended if you're into cozy fantasy right now. Cozy fantasy has kind of been popping off right now in the YouTube, BookTube, book community because Legends and Lattes has got so much traction. That specific story, I don't know if I'm really that interested in, but I do love the idea of like an immersive fantasy science fiction world where we just get a lot of like great world building, good vibes, and do a little bit of a character study. I think it's a little bit easier to get fully immersed into a world in the visual medium like an anime or a movie, but I love how books can kind of wrap you up like this too. I think it gives authors a chance to do some more stylized writing and to really explore character and to really like lay out a world and maybe set it up for an adventure down the road. So some of you might not see this because Kindle Unlimited books usually start you off on the first page, but as I'm scrolling through the cover into the next set of pages, this little inside cover, I don't know if you can see it, but it's got like stars and planets and spaceships, and it's got kind of this retro childhood feel. And I just think it adds to that cozy, welcoming, like vibes. So if you just open this book up, Kindle starts me off here in chapter 1 in transit, but flipping to that page from the title shows me that there is an epigraph in here that I would have 100% missed if not for doing this kind of vloggy review sort of thing. I haven't historically been the biggest fan of epigraphs, but in case y'all read this and missed it, I'm gonna read it here. On the ground we stand. From our ships we live. By the stars we hope. Exodian proverb. I mean, it's simplistic enough, it's fine. I don't think you necessarily miss out on anything with it. It's one of the many elements in the book that's kind of setting the mood, and possibly it is setting up the overarching theme of this story. Just finished the first section of this story. We're introduced to a girl / woman We don't have her name yet, and already it seems like this story is going to have more stories than the Psalm for Wild build, because this woman has paid somebody off to get a new identity, change their name, and escape a circumstance that they're at least making sound like they just were at the wrong place in the wrong time. And this story is also tackling poverty and different living conditions, where the last one kind of implied that all humans were living pretty well. Already this is a very different kind of vibe and story, but I'm still loving Chambers' style of writing. It's really engaging and has just enough like flowery prose, poetry to kind of make everything flow and seem really lovely. Like here in the second chapter, we're introduced to a boy/man whose name is Ashby, and he's talking about how it's actually quite noisy in space. When rocks hit the outer hull with their familiar pattering, he knew which were small enough to ignore and which meant trouble. He could tell by the amount of static crackling over the ansible how far he was from the person on the other end. These were the sounds of spacer life, an underscore of vulnerability and distance. They were reminders of what a fragile thing it was to be alive. But those sounds also meant safety. An absence of sound meant the air was no longer flowing, engines no longer running, anti-grav nets no longer holding your feet to the floor. Silence belonged to the vacuum outside. Silence was death. In this one paragraph, it gives you all of these little mechanics about running a ship, all the little indicators from sound, and it's using something besides visual cues to kind of like bring the reader into the experience and make them feel like they're really on the ship. And it's also saying something larger about what this noise and sound means and about the difference between a noisy environment being a lively one that could sustain you and a quiet one being the end of everything. Okay, so the woman hiding her identity's name is Rosemary, but she's finally on the ship and meeting the grouchy Corbin, who's giving her a tour of the facilities. He's mentioning where the spacesuits are and the escape pods are and what to do in case of an alarm, which to me, like, all makes sense and seems to be like the pertinent, immediate stuff I would personally want to know. And meanwhile, Rosemary's having a completely different reaction than I would have, where the book says,
She tried not to read too much into the fact that the only thing Corbin had mentioned were related to emergencies or injuries.
That's just practical and only makes sense when you're in like a deep space vessel. So it's really interesting to me that Rosemary's already like super pessimistic, and I'm wondering if it's in Corbin's delivery because he doesn't really want to be giving her the tour in this speech and doesn't think she's qualified. Also, we've met another AI, Lovey, and I love her. I think I'm just predisposed to love robots and AI more than the average person because it only takes like a little bit of them being very cheerful and friendly, or a little bit of them being like a Debbie Downer like Marvin in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for me to immediately fall in love and identify and want to hang out with them and get more about them. Just got to tip off, and I'm really glad that Rosemary is getting comfortable with the crew. It looks like she's gonna have a couple friends and she's getting used to the new living space, and it looks like something that could make her happy and could be a good fresh start for her. I was a little bit worried because Rosemary seems to have lived a really well-off life, and this particular space cruiser, while well-maintained, doesn't seem to be luxurious or to have any sense of extravagant nature to it. I didn't know if Rosemary was used to like a lot of extras in her day-to-day life, or if she like needed them or whatever. I also like that there seems to be a lot of variety in the crew, so I feel like we're gonna get some good social interactions and it's gonna be a fun time. I kind of like Corbin despite everything. I know he's grouchy, but I feel like there's some stuff we just don't know about him yet. I'm at the dinner scene, and Rosemary has been trying really hard to be polite to the different species. And because this is a new situation for her and she's unused to it, I've been trying to ignore some of the things that I haven't liked about how Rosemary's point of view has been describing things. But she's coming off as really speciesist, which in some ways is kind of confusing to me because she's making a lot of assumptions about Six based off of her species. And we don't really know if Six was raised with humans or by the Indahareski people or like a combined colony. So we don't know what kind of foods like Six grew up eating.
She appreciated Six's subtlety, but she could not ignore the irony of an Andrisk teaching her how to eat a human dish.
Lots of things Rosemary's been saying or doing in her head around these different species have been like rubbing me the wrong way, and I've been trying to ignore it. Like,
oh, she's in an unfamiliar situation. Everyone is a little bit awkward when they're meeting someone for the first time, especially if they don't know what the cultural norms are.
but at this point in time, she's coming off really snobbish and like she knows the rules better than anyone else here. I hope we move past it as we get further into this story, because I'm only about 13% in, and if Rosemary is going to continue to act like this the whole way, it's going to be a really long read. As we've discovered more about Lovey, it's been fine, but it's been pretty standard, I think, like the question about whether or not AI has sentience, whether this person loves the AI, whether the AI loves them back, the question about whether or not the AI wants the body. All of this feels very generic and like something that I've read and gone through before. For like the Psalm for the Wild Bill, I felt like it was bringing something very unique and different to the genre. What's probably the most interesting about this so far is the whole like tunneling through space to get from like one point to another point. I'm also pretty curious about our main female character's history and why she's hiding it from the others. And I think at this point I'm gonna just jump back into reading and let you guys know when I have a new update. So I'm over here in Tangibles Reading Sprints. It's been a while since I've wanted to update you guys on anything in this book. But one element they keep bringing up is the different species and speciesism that had cropped in, and like just some cultural differences across different alien races. One of them is with Six, who is some form of like feathered reptile-like alien. And in her culture, hatchlings, aka children, don't have as much value as an adult, because an adult has learned skills and has made friends and lovers, where a hatchling has just begun and they don't have all these skill sets that are useful to community or relationships or anything like that. She hits an interesting note here where she says, the idea that a loss of potential was somehow worse than a loss of achievement and knowledge was something that she had never been able to wrap her brain around. I'm still enjoying reading The Long Way Around a Sad, Angry Planet, but I do think that it's like more conversation, world building, like philosophical than the Psalm for the Wild Built. In that specific way, I think I liked that there was some plot and character arc going on in Psalm for the Wild Built that gave me more sense of direction than this, which is like a little bit more meandering. Perhaps that's the difference with a cozy fantasy style story in having like a large ensemble cast versus like two specific beings to focus on. I don't know, I feel like I would love this story to pieces if I hadn't just come off reading A Psalm for the Wild Bill. But because I have that one fresh in my memory and as a comparison, this one is just not being as well received as it otherwise would be. So we finally found out why Rosemary changed her name. I guess it's a fine reason. I am getting more into the story now that we finally got into it and we're starting to get like a couple more character arcs and information about the crew and stuff. I guess I like that Rosemary is blameless. If she was like a criminal or something at this point in the story, I'd start to feel bad about her deception to the crew and I'd start to wonder how she could fit in. But because it's something her dad did, I can see both why she felt the need to change her name and how she can still like have a good life here with the crew. I'm kind of like anxious for them to get to their destination at this point in time. That one little like attack by pirates who were kind of desperate was a good little action piece. I think I need just a little bit more than this book is giving as far as like events go. Wrapping it all up. Been about a day and a half since I finished The Long Way Around a Small Angry Planet. Right after I finished reading it, I was thinking like
3 stars, okay.
not really comparable to the Psalm for the Wild Built. But then I slept on it, and honestly, I had a wild dream about this book. And I realized that there were quite a few interesting elements about it that I had sort of overlooked because I was disappointed about where the story ended. The 2 books provide equal food for thought if you're looking for something that's a little bit thoughtful in science fiction. I like the peaceful bend towards things. The Long Way Around the Small Angry Planet has some pacing issues, and for me personally, it ended just about where I'd want to pick things up. And in the book I read, Becky Becky Chambers has like a little bit about this book at the end, and I read some of it. It basically explains that she started reading this while she was employed at one job, and then she ended up leaving that job and going someplace else. I think that uncertainty and some of those concern issues are part of what you're experiencing in The Long Way Around the Small Angry Planet. That anxiety, that feeling of futility, that like slightly lost feeling maybe that she was having is reflected in these prose. And maybe that's like a reach for me, but when I was reading this about the writing of the book part, a lot of the book kind of came into place for me. It's not a bad thing, by the way. It's just a thing to know about yourself as a writer or as a reader when you're picking something up. I didn't like these characters as much. I feel like the more intense focus on sibling Dex and Mosscap in the Song for the Wild Built was better. I also felt like the one-on-one dynamic and the concentration there was better. I would have liked if we could have like really zeroed in and focused on any one of the crew. As a group, I feel like I didn't get quite enough or like a big enough arc. And like I was saying, like with the Captain Ashby and his love interest Pay or Pie ended was like where I'm curious about starting. With Rosemary kind of coming into her own, owning the bad thing her dad did, getting that relationship with somebody else on the crew. That's like where I would have wanted things to start, and not like this back thing where we were. Even with like some of the minor characters, like the engineers, Lovey, where she starts versus where she and the one crew member's relationship starts versus how it ends, that ending to me is like a more compelling place to pick up and discover and explore. Especially for me, the navigator, who starts off as a they, like a plural person, goes through this transformation that makes them like a singular person. Exploring that, how they felt about it, what it means, that's just like stuff I wanted that we didn't get. And like all stuff I was more interested in than the stuff that we did get. Even like the antagonistic aliens and their like sort of truce that was going on, and then them not having a truce. More information about how those aliens interact, what happened to that one guy who attacked them. Like there's just a lot of stuff I wanted to know that we did not get. There are some like interesting comparisons I think you can make between Lovey and the Navigator and how their story goes. And I think too like how people perceive those two stories. But that's like a discussion question I'd want to have with a book group where all of us are reading the book, because I definitely have like solidified opinions on that, and I'm more curious to see how other people view it and why they view it maybe differently than I do. Overall though, this was like a mood. I don't think you should read two Becky Chambers books back to back the way I did. I feel like they're kind of like a relaxing, breezy read, and like the kind of thing you take a breather with, or like the kind of thing you sit at a beach with. But I really enjoyed them, and I really enjoyed Becky Chambers. I'm definitely going to read more from her later, and I think her whole catalog is probably really good based off of these two books I've experienced. I think she does better when she focuses on the character arc, and I think she does better with less characters versus an ensemble cast. Both of them were good in their own way and deliver something that I think is really special and like exactly what I want from my science fiction reads. Talk to me in those comments down below. Did you guys read A Song for the Wild Bill or The Long Way Around a Sad Angry Planet? And which one of the two did you like better if you read them both? Let me know in those comments down below. And if you guys got this far in the video, could you go ahead and leave me a spaceship emoji? And as always, keep reading. Bye!